If Congress does not assert its equities in this Jack Smith matter, those equities will dissolve. Right now, my worry is that too many of my colleagues in Congress think, well, this is an ongoing matter, so we just have to allow it to play out. And it's the same loser mentality that infected much of the Congress in the early days of the Robert Mueller investigation. Obviously, we proved that to be the fraud that it was. And not for nothing, Charlie, but you got to see this guy McGonigal, who was on the ground floor of the investigation to accuse Trump of working with Russia, has now pled guilty to working with Russia. But back to this matter, here's what we ought to do, and we shouldn't make it that complicated. First, we should tell Jack Smith that he has to show up and give a transcribed interview to the House Judiciary Committee in the next 15 days. If he doesn't do that, we should issue a subpoena. If he ignores the subpoena, we should hold him in criminal contempt of Congress and force him to be the first prosecutor to bring a case while under criminal contempt himself. And if Merrick Garland won't enforce that criminal contempt, then he subjects himself to an impeachment of the House. So it would be an attorney general under impeachment, a prosecutor under contempt. And I think that frames what's going on better than just sitting back and hoping we hear no evil, see no evil, and speak no evil as this plays out. Because if we grant the premise, Charlie, that this is an ongoing legitimate matter, then it just builds into it the notion that it is law enforcement activity and not election interference. Congress has equities at play with election interference. We ought to do that. Simultaneous to that, you can actually bring President Trump in to give testimony to the Congress, and in doing so, immunize him. Now, there's different forms of immunity that take place at the committee level, subcommittee level. In some instances, for full immunity, you have to have more of a supermajority vote. But if you had a supermajority vote of a committee, like Speaker McCarthy could set up a select committee tomorrow that could bring Trump in and immunize him, and then we could proceed with the very legitimate investigative work that we're doing of the Bidens and the corrupt DOJ. Unfortunately, none of those things are happening. Instead, Congress is not in Washington, not assembled. And I think the timing is on purpose. No timing in D.C. is ever just, a mere coincidence. And so right as Congress is leaving town, right as we're walking away from our equities, you see this acceleration of activity against Trump.
So yeah, let's be specific here, though. So immunize him from what crimes, even if he's under current indictment? Is that including even the obstruction claims? And give us some examples of how this has been used recently.
Well, it hasn't been used recently, but obviously we're aware of the ability for any person to plead the fifth. You can dissolve someone's ability to plead the fifth if you immunize them. And so Congress has this ability that's been recognized. It's even laid out in 18 U.S.C.A. 6002 and 6005, if folks want to look it up. But there you've got the ability to say, well, we're hereby compelling your testimony. We're giving you immunity for anything you say to us and anything that would lead to. And so, for example, if President Trump came in and said, I'm here to give you testimony about the witch hunt, the abuse of criminal process that Congress has legitimate oversight equities to resolve. And if he were to say things to us, we could immunize him for that conduct that he were to discuss.
Does it take a vote, or does it
frequently happens? But these aren't usual times.
Is it a committee vote? Is it the whole House that has to vote on immunization? And when was the last time this statute was used?
I don't know when the last time it was used. I can say it can be any committee or subcommittee that can grant immunity. So we could even bring him into the subcommittee chaired by my good friend and colleague, Andy Biggs, the crime subcommittee. That has jurisdiction over some of these activities of the Department of Justice. And if Trump were to essentially become a whistleblower, you have to think about it almost like whistleblower protections. Trump, the ultimate whistleblower, potentially the beneficiary of congressional immunity on some of the information.
Wait. So hold on. I just want to make sure I understand this. So that Donald Trump could be called in, let's say, by the Andy Biggs committee or whatever, or the Weaponization of Government committee, which obviously he's a subject matter expert. And as long as he is giving whistleblower testimony on each one of the charges against him, that would effectively neuter the Department of Justice from being able to continue to pursue charges against him. Am I understanding this correctly?
It's a little more nuanced than that, Charlie. You're immunized for the statements you make and the conduct that uncovers. If we're talking in hypotheticals, if President Trump had committed a murder somewhere, I don't know that giving testimony about the weaponization of the federal government would immunize that type of conduct. But I think particularly where you've got Jack Smith trying to fashion the actions that President took while in office, to try to evaluate and investigate information that was coming across his desk, you could certainly immunize him for that. So I think that the areas where we could provide the broadest immunity for President Trump would be around the conspiracy charges, the deprivation of rights charges. It's almost hard to say with a straight face that Jack Smith has brought. In fact, it was the FBI doing the most to deprive people of their rights when they had agents meeting with Facebook, Meta, Twitter, all these technology companies to try to get the Hunter Biden laptop story just scrubbed from the entire information domain during the 2020 presidential contest. So that would be a specific area where I think we could neuter the deprivation of rights and conspiracy charges in the Jack Smith indictment if we brought President Trump in for whistleblower testimony.
And so potentially Donald Trump could come in as a whistleblower and blow the whistle on what was happening up in the events of leading up to January 6th. Nancy Pelosi didn't want to give troops, because a lot of the indictment is centered around the events that lead up to that. And so, but look, I see no downside here. So you're going to have to walk me through this, Matt. What you're saying is interesting. I don't know if it'll stand up in court, but it's certainly worth a try. And this is exactly the type of thing we need. As the Department of Justice is used as a Democrat super PAC, why wouldn't we try to offer Donald Trump immunity and force the hand of the Department of Justice, especially on the conspiracy charges and the January 6th related stuff? Is there any downside here? I don't quite see a negative.
Well, in theory, the downside of bringing anyone before Congress to give testimony is that if you say something that is material and that is not accurate, that can create a cascade of follow-on charges. So it's never something that you typically think of as a first step to try to bring people into Congress to give testimony, because it's not typically something people enjoy a great deal. But in this case, I think we misunderstand the fight that we are in. Right now, you have the Department of Justice functioning as the enforcement wing of the Democratic Party. And in a lot of ways, what you're seeing now was set up by Eric Holder and Barack Obama, because they got some of their most talented political operatives and they gave them the ability to bring charges. They turned them into prosecutors that are now career prosecutors and above reproach. But the reality is these are left-wing, oftentimes Soros-aligned and trained killers, and they're coming after our people, our movement, and our president. And I think that if Congress just accepts this premise that it's an ongoing matter and thus we shouldn't be involved, then you underscore the legitimacy of that very matter. That's where I'm in the minority of the majority. I want to be very clear with you, Charlie. Most Republicans in Congress just think we ought to throw our hands in the air and allow the chips to fall where they may. I think that is a tremendous disservice to the Constitution when we are facing an election interference operation, not a legitimate prosecution.
Look, we need every creative idea. This is not a legitimate indictment of Donald Trump. It's not a legitimate investigation. We need to reject the premise. And so what you're saying, Matt Gaetz, is most of your Republican colleagues are gutless wonders and don't want to deal with this. But what we should do is we should have Donald Trump come in, force him to testify, immunize him, and then force a constitutional issue. I'm fully in support of that. There is no other option, everybody. We're just going to sit around and hope that a rigged D.C. jury and zip code justice and the interference of an election. No. It's time to fight fire with fire. Let's fight back. Matt Gaetz is outlined. Look, I don't know if it's going to stand up in court. You got to try. Sitting idly by while they shred the Constitution is not an option. Matt Gaetz. So, right. Matt, we're into the reboot, realignment. I've lost track of how many re's. I've said this before, and I get hate mail for it. I don't care. Governor DeSantis is a wonderful governor, not running a good presidential campaign, not reading the room. Ron DeSantis has campaign manager is out and replaced with chief of staff. Matt Gaetz, you are a Floridian and a friend of Ron DeSantis, but you're behind Donald Trump for the presidency. What's going on here?
I agree with you. Ron's done a great job as governor of Florida, and frankly, I'm working pretty hard to keep him the governor of Florida for the next few years. This is a pattern I've seen before from Ron DeSantis. In 2018, when I was working as a senior part of his campaign, he woke up one day and didn't think the campaign was going well, and he asked me to do an audit or a review of the personnel we'd assembled. And I told him that if we continued with that team, that Andrew Gillum would be the governor of Florida and he would not be. And in sweeping fashion, he replaced the senior members of the team. And the great irony is he brought in Susie Wiles to right the ship. She did. Ron won. He's done a great job. And now Susie Wiles is the titular head of the Trump campaign. So the interesting square dancing that we do, kind of trading partners around in Florida politics a good bit on the campaign staff side. And now I think Ron has had a similar realization that the team that he had in place had burnt through tens of millions of dollars, that Ron DeSantis has waged a campaign against his own vote share. Ron DeSantis was knocking down about a third of the vote in the Republican primary before he became a candidate. And since becoming a candidate, he's clubbed his own vote share down to about half of where it was before he got in the race. So I think that would make anybody running question the team they had around him and the predicate of the strategy. Right now, I don't think it's anything wrong with Ron DeSantis and his campaign. I think it's just that the American people see the moment we're in, and we see that President Trump has unique skills and experience and capability to get our economy going again, and also to obliterate a weaponized government that's been turned against our people. I don't know that Ron is really in a moment to captivate that energy that President Trump seems to have really zeroed in on.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's engaging in a policy debate. That's not what this is at all, right? This is a primal scream, as Steve Bannon would say. This is a time to get back at the Uniparty for an all-out Bolshevik Maoist agenda against the American people. And we want a street fighter. We want a bodyguard. We want a UFC champion. We don't need policy talks. And by the way, I said this yesterday on social media. Ron DeSantis lays out this classical education plan. I think it's wonderful. That's him at his best. Is it time for Ron DeSantis to not further damage his national bona fides and continue as a rock star governor of Florida, and then maybe look at potential political prospects?
Yeah, I think so. Ron's a young man. He's brilliant and driven, and I think he's got a bright political future ahead in Florida and in national politics. And I'm going to be a big cheerleader of his when he comes back to resume the governorship in the Sunshine State. I do think that getting drubbed in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada doesn't necessarily set up those future prospects as well as unifying behind President Trump. But, you know, there is a policy debate going on. You're right that it's not the primal urge that draws us to a particular campaign, but we do need to make sure some of these arguments that are being made don't prevail. I just saw today, Charlie, Nikki Haley criticized the great senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, for putting holds on these woke generals who want to continue to pay for abortions and abortion services and abortion travel with taxpayer money. And so we do need to see some of these bad ideas, like those advanced by Nikki Haley, defeated. We need to see the bad ideas that Chris Christie and Mike Pence are advancing regarding Ukraine defeated. Ukraine's not the 51st state. Our future is not inexorably linked to theirs. And I think President Trump's in a position to really get the best of both worlds, the right policy arguments, but then also the right visceral urge to make the necessary changes we have to make to save the country.
Look, I'm going to be talking to some donors tonight, some of which agree with me, some of which disagree. You know, some of them texted me and said, Charlie, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Glenn Youngkin. Let me just say my advice publicly. It's all a waste of time, guys. Okay, these are nice people. Glenn Youngkin, good governor of Virginia. Ron DeSantis, next batter up, go waste another couple $100 million. Stop it, guys. Get behind Trump, chase ballots, secure our elections, have all these wonderful governors. You guys can have the feast of the governors in 2028. But we need a country. Donald Trump's going to win the primary, whether by 30 points or 50 points. That's the mystery. That's the only question, is the margin at this point. Let's do the boring stuff, chase ballots, secure election stuff. Ron DeSantis actually did very well in Florida, and I don't want him to mess up his future political prospects. He's an excellent governor. This is not his time. Matt Gaetz, excellent job. Thanks so much.